Hello and welcome to the Memory Capsule Podcast, where we interview members of the Pokemon TCG community. My name is Rafal Gladys. Each week, we'll be speaking with our guests about their background with Pokemon TCG, how they got involved with the game, and give them an opportunity to share their love of the game. Today's guest is Kyle Sabelhaus. Kyle is a veteran player who has seen success in the Pokemon TCG for decades. Today, he is best known as one of the incredibly talented members of the Pokemon TCG commentary team. But over the years, Kyle has had great success across all levels of competition, winning regionals, placing high at nationals, and finishing as high as top 16 at the World Championship. In between stints on the commentary desk, Kyle has continued to attend events to this day, making it to day two at several regionals in the past few years. How you doing, Kyle?
Hey, doing well. That's that. Thank you for that great introduction.
Yeah, I always try to hype everyone up at the start.
Until you tear me down.
Yeah,
All right, I
exactly.
see how
Time
this
to
goes.
time to dissect everything. Um, is there anything I might have missed out on? Any big finishes that I might have not brought up?
I mean, it goes all over. It was the one regional, so that was a shining achievement on what looked to be a great start. It was my first Masters regional tournament, and sure enough, I won the thing. And ever since then, I was chasing it and got second at multiple, third at a couple, and top eight at a bunch more. So I think I ended up with like 10, at least 10 plus regional top eights, and never was able to get back to where I started.
I mean, I think a lot of people would be very envious of 10 regional top eights.
It's it's not too bad, but man, once you get a taste for the victory that young, you're like, oh, I might be
Oh,
him, and
gotcha,
then
for sure, for sure.
yeah.
Um, so I'm gonna get started by just asking you the question we ask all of our guests, which is just, what is your favorite card of all time and why?
Ooh, man, all right. I feel like this answer changes depending on how when I dive into retro. I think a good answer now is Delta Flygon. Delta Flygon has a special place in my heart. That card is so fun. It opened up the doors for so many different cards to be played, and it led me to winning 3 state championships in an 8 calendar day span. So I owe a lot of props to that card.
Could you tell us a bit more about it and what it did for anyone who's not familiar?
Yeah, so obviously stage 2 Pokemon, you got to get that rare candy, but back then it was rare candy could be as easy as the first turn. So you'd have opportunities to use Delta Supply, I believe it was called, or Delta Rain, something like that. It basically just lets you accelerate another basic energy or a Delta energy, which was a rainbow energy that didn't damage you if you're a Delta Pokemon. So you could accelerate one additional energy, but it also stacked. So you could do it with multiple Flygon out. So you could charge up a 3 energy attack in one turn with 2 of those bad boys ready to go, which led to just a rainbow medley of attackers. There was a Fire Mew that could copy attacks, a Water Mew that could copy attacks, Executor was in the deck, Delta Flygon EX was one of the most broken cards of 2007 back then, and you could charge that up, dealing like 80 damage and 10 spread all over the place. So there's some pretty disgusting things you could do if you got that going early.
Hmm. And I like the Flygon shout out. It's that coincidentally it's my favorite Pokemon, so I'm glad
Oh
I got
right.
we got a Flygon fan in the house. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that was one of the more confident times of playing Pokemon that I'd ever had was that state championship run. I went and I won 3 and I got third at another in 2 weekends. And just over and over again, we would look back at the list, even though we won, and said, "What can we do to make this better?" Make some adjustments for the next day, depending on what we were expecting, and that got me addicted to metagaming. Just seeing instantaneous results of what players I expect to see and how I was able to counter them. It was so rewarding.
Hmm. So I guess that's like a perfect segue then to me asking, like, how did you get involved with the game? What were your first events? Because you're saying you won all these state championships back to back. Like, what area of the country in general were you even playing in that you were able to make it to all these events in such a short span of time?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy. It was a lot of traveling, and shout out to all the Poke parents that were pushing us kids around at the time. I was living in Florida when we were doing that one, so the stint was North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Louisiana of all places. So I didn't even play the Florida one because it was just easier to attend those four events back to back to back. And they were 1 day events, and then you'd drive X amount of hours to the next place, sleep in a McDonald's parking lot, and go to town the next day. we we were dedicated to our craft. But the initial introduction to Pokemon was at the start of everything. Me and my brother were fortunate enough to be around when Pokemon first was introduced. We got to play some events back when I was 8 years old, back in 1998 or whatever it was, and we were playing at our local card store. Didn't know what we were doing, but our dad looked up some decks on Pojo and was able to get us both 21-0 with Haymaker decks. We met in the finals, and we just told the store owner, "We'll just battle it out at home on the porch. If you just give us first and second place prizes, we'll handle it at home." I got the best of him that time, but the story goes on to say he gets the best of me in a lot more of these later on.
Did you play the video game at all? Because a lot of the kind of more recent interviews I've had have been players who got into the game maybe 2011, 2008, kind of that time period, or maybe even more recently. But you kind of got in like right when Pokemon was like the big thing. What was
Yeah.
it like kind of growing up during that time period?
Oh, it was on fire. It was ridiculous. My first introduction to the game or Pokemon at all was my cousin ends up attending like some family function. He's like 9 years old or whatever, and he's walking around with his Game Boy. And this is the classic Game Boy, no color on that thing, and he's just attacking with a Squirtle. I have no idea what the concept of the game even is, but he's so stoked on this thing. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna sit down and watch him play. And sure enough, my brother and I got my mom to buy us two copies of red, and we got a red and a blue, and just got completely addicted to the Pokemon realm and doing all that fun stuff.
Hmm. Did you have a lot of other friends who knew how to play the card game? I think my big thing with the card game is that it always felt like all the kids would collect, but no one really knew how to play. Were you kind of the few kids who knew how to play in your area, or was it pretty competitive?
It was not competitive at all. It was just me and my brother. We were the only ones who took it seriously. Everyone else was throwing cards into a pile or making up rules. I remember a kid in third grade. We were playing on in the like at the playground, and he pulls out his Tangela and attaches a fire energy to it, and some kid starts yelling that it's burned now. So he starts completing the actions for burn because there's a fire energy on your grass Pokemon. I'm like, well, whatever. You guys could have figured out your own rules, I guess.
Hey, I mean that was just adding more layers of depth to the game, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was very interactive to watch them try to figure this out, but I couldn't play any of my good decks against them. It was so unfair.
Um, at what point did you then get involved with playing the game at a bit more of a competitive level? Because I know in general the game was also kind of the structure was just significantly different. Like Nintendo didn't really run the game until 2004, so it was just Wizards of the Coast doing their own thing. I've heard a lot of infamous stories about some of the weird Wizards of the Coast decision making with like not doing erratas or kind of trying to push players into playing Magic. What was it like playing first when it was owned by Wizards of the Coast in that very early era, and then the transitioning into playing it into the Nintendo era?
Yeah, there was a big disconnect, I would say. You had no idea what was going on 200 miles or even 20 miles away from you. It was just local store does something. There was no internet presence as well, so we had no idea what was happening. It was just you were playing for the love of the game, which was fun, obviously, that we got to do that, but you didn't get to meta game, you didn't get to figure out who the best players were. It was just if you were the king of your store, you were the best player in the world that day, and you just kept rolling with that. Uh, but when my brother and I, that was we all did this when we originally lived in Maryland. We were Baltimore natives, and we moved in 2003. So we got to move into right when Pokemon organized play really started to pick up around like '04, '05, and we were in Orlando. And that's when everything really started to spark for us. They had Pokemon leagues that they were really invested in, and then those leagues were just the gateway to, hey, there's a state champion. Hey, there's a this, there's a, and we're like, oh, this could be our soccer. We don't have to run around and get sweaty. We can just go do this and have fun. So we found a new sport, and we were in love with the fact that we could just be the Pokemon guys instead.
So as the game then developed in 2003 2004 to being a bit more of a structured format with the first like official world championship, how did it feel with that being kind of the end of the line, kind of the big prize at the end of the season and playing for that?
So our first official year playing was, I would technically call it 2005 then. That was the first year that we got to play in official events. We started out with the city championships and everything, but we did catch the tail end of 2004 because, as fate would have it, World Championships was in Orlando that year. So we had no idea what was happening with that. Obviously, we got to touch a little bit on like the league and that summer, and everyone's like, "Hey, World Championships is like only 20 minutes away. We got to go check it out." Also, Hulk Hogan's on a Pokemon Pikachu bus. Like, we got to see what's going on there. So we went and checked it out as spectators, and it was pretty cool to see like, oh, they're like really invested in this. They've got all these outdoor events going on. I remember throwing around some hidden legend Gorbis or whatever outside in the 80 90-degree heat, playing in some of the outside events that were going on there, while the real competitors are inside having a blast and trying to win the world championship. And after that, we just fully committed to a real season of it, because it just seemed like that was the right way to go about things. Just have it all culminate with Worlds and then run it all over again.
Mm. And then what did you do back then to improve so much as a player? Because 2006, like you said, was kind of your first season in Masters, and I mean, you had a lot of success that season. You said you had that regional win. You ended up top 32 at Worlds that season. Especially in an era where there was just a lot less communication, a lot less information, and lists were kind of really held close to the chest. How were you able to build the connections and build the knowledge to become a successful player back then?
It was really important to have the right group around you, which I'd say is really important right now as well. Like, if you want to get good at the game currently, then there's a million resources to get good. But if you want to get great, then you have to have a dedicated group of players that will sit down, test with you, metagame with you, and really fully commit to the process. I think if you wanted to get good back then, it was forced on you. You didn't have a resource to just be okay at the game. You either were bad or you were fantastic. There was no middle ground. And I was not going to dedicate all this time to it if I was going to be bad. So me and my brother, we sat down, and we were all business about it. We used the little resources that we had to do research and figure out what was going on. So we had Pokegym.net back then. It's just a competitive online forum where players would post their tournament results, maybe predictions on what new cards are coming out and what they're gonna how they're gonna incorporate these into their new decks. And we would be printing cards months in advance, as like Japan still had 6 months on us back then. We'd get those cards and we'd just be testing right out the gate, and it gave us a big edge going into our local scene, and eventually when we moved out to playing in like those other events out of the state too.
I think one of the big things that maybe players take for granted now, especially even when playing retro formats, is that lists have in general just gotten very streamlined. Even players now playing 2006 or like RSPK format are really playing very streamlined, very perfected versions of some of these archetypes. Did it feel like every player kind of had their own version of playing some of these archetypes, or a little bit more creativity with how things were built?
Yeah, I would argue even almost playstyle was real back then, because you didn't have a deck list to go off of and say Tor Brecklef has announced this as correct, therefore this is correct. We're all going to play it this way. You kind of approached a deck with a general idea of, oh, I like this strategy of moving damage counters and healing and dealing like a nice fair amount of damage, trying to get 3-hit knockouts. Okay, let's build around that, and then you'd build Sceptile Slowbro and have fun with your whatever idea you came up with that. But there was no set archetypes back then. It was kind of just you had some favorite cards, and some players would say, "Oh, I kind of like playing it like this. Okay, cool. I like playing it like that." And you'd all be approaching a similar strategy, but nobody had a list that was even close to perfect back then. You'll see lists from back then at the World's era. Some of them are terrible, really bad decks. Like you go like I think I would make like 15 card changes with the knowledge I have now of some of these things, but that was the best we had back then, and you just went with it.
Yeah. Do you feel like the game was just designed in a way that allowed more archetypes to be possible, or do you feel like it was more just that player skill was such a big thing that people were able to overcome some of these bad lists? Because you're saying, play style, like I'm sure a lot of players today say they might wish to play spread decks, but those decks simply just aren't an option. Do you think that kind of stuff was more possible back then because of player skill overcoming maybe the weakness of the decks, or just the design of the game being built to allow for that?
Certainly player skill assisted back then because you it was a combination of being skillful in the game, having more reps than your opponent, and also you have more time to figure out your game plan because power creep wasn't nearly as strong as it is now. We're not worried about our board being swept in 3 turns from Iron Hands taking multiple prize cards back then. You had 4 turns to use your Dunsparce and set up a full board, and then maybe do some sudden flashes to paralyze and buy even more time. Like you had that first knockout wasn't coming for 4 turns, and you could do a full setup by then, and then come up with a really nice game plan, which is why I really appreciated playing back then. There were just so many cards that you could use to your advantage to outplay opponents in those spots, like Rocket's Admin, POW Hand Extension, Swoop Teleporter. There are just so many fun interactions that you could just play your opponent like a fiddle, and they had no option other than to accept defeat.
So now, when it comes to that era of play, like I mentioned, you got top 32 at Worlds that in 2006, which is a lot of players look back as one of the kind of the best formats of all time. Could you tell us a little bit about that season? That's where you got that regional win, that Worlds finish. What's so memorable about that season for you?
Yeah, I'll do you one better, and tell you about '05 Worlds as well because I snuck into that one as a
Ooh, go for
senior.
it.
I was able to play that first season in '05 in Florida as a senior, so that was my one and only year ever playing in that division, and I learned so much from that opening season. Obviously, back then Florida was one of the hot spots of the Pokemon TCG. We've had multiple world championships come out of that area. So many great national senior level players that would come out of that area. Bobby Malik won nationals there. Garrett Farrington won nationals there over the years. Just Orion Craig won nationals as a senior. Just senior dominance was coming from Florida every single year, and it was so impressive. And to be a part of that was just a really cool experience for me. I didn't do it on that level. I was able to do okay. I did enough to win a whatever they called it, a gym challenge back then or something. They had a tournament that got you sent directly to Worlds if you won at the end of the season. It was kind of the same setup as a city. And sure enough, I won that, got my invite to play in the World Championship. I flew my grandpa out to San Diego with me because my mom and dad thought it was a scam. So me and my 70-year-old grandpa fly over to San Diego and start hanging out there. And I had decided that I wanted to play Metagross because I hated losing to Metacham. Metacham was the bane of my existence. All the rich, snobby kids were playing it because those cards are $40. And I'm a 15-year-old. I don't own $40 cards. I have Metagrosses. So I made this own hybrid deck with uh, multiple Jirachi and Metagross. And I'm just taking advantage of the fact that I can use Wishing Star over and over and over again, using Swoop Teleporter, trying to rare candy into a Metagross, and then we both have the same amount of energies attached. I'm dealing 70, you had weakness, and I'm blowing them out of the water. And it didn't have any good matchups against anything else, but somehow I was able to go 5-3, which back then was enough to get you 28th spot and get you into the top 32. And then I ended up losing in the top 32, but it was quite an experience for me in my first year of playing in the World Championship. And then to go on to '06 as well. After I'd finished on that season, I'm hooked at this point. This was such a great experience, but also I hear all the terrifying things about joining the Masters division, and these are where the big boys play. These guys are in college, all right? This isn't We're not messing around anymore. So you got to be really good if you want to play here. So me and my brother, we really stepped it up. He's still playing in seniors, so he's just copying my lists and beating everybody to death. But I'm working really hard, trying to get some accomplishments under my belt in the Masters division, and I had a pretty good run. I got second place at the state championship. I believe I only played one state that year, and it was just in Florida. This was before I really started traveling outside of the state. Um, I got second place playing a what was I playing? I was playing Dark Tyranitar, I think. I was playing my favorite Powtar deck, and I played against three fighting decks in top eight, top four, and in finals. I went through some really good players too. I think I played against Omar Izaguirre, uh, Ryan Virgil, who a lot of people know. Both those guys were on Team R, which was one of like the more prominent teams back then. And then Chris Bianchi, who's also a Team R member. He beats me in finals. I may have cried, but it was a good learning experience for me. Of Even though you feel like you've done all the work, sometimes it's just not going to work out. And getting through all those fighting decks for me was really tricky. Uh, Built off that, I really like the deck still, but I was playing a lot of LBS too, which was that Blastoise Lugia Steelix deck, which was focused on Energy Rain Acceleration, dealing 200 damage with Lugia EX, or sniping 100 with the Steelix. So that deck was super powerful. It originated in Florida, and I was really considering it. But we also had an explosion of players who were just picking it up because it was the best deck and had no idea how to play it well. And that's when I thought I had an opportunity with Dark Tyranitar once more to show off that, you know what, I actually know this matchup pretty well, and I'll be able to figure this out. And I was playing that Spin Tail Tyranitar, dealing 20 damage to everything, but of course you've got your Dark Energies too that are adding 10 extra damage to the active, which doesn't sound like a lot right now, but it's huge back then. You've got 4 Pow Hand Extension, which lets you move energies from the active to the bench, or you could bring a bench Pokemon to the active. So there were some disgusting plays where you'd blow up your Electrode, give your opponent some prize cards, Pow Hand 2 energies to a Pidgeot, bring the Pidgeot to the active spot, and then blow it out of the water as you Rocket Admin them down to 3. And now they lost their whole draw engine, and you're running over them. And was fortunate enough to come out on top and win against Lugia Blastoise Steelix in the finals against another great player too, in Jin Wang.
Now, you have mentioned a lot of players that there's a couple names that I recognize, but I think there's a lot of names that maybe players who are listening right now might not be very familiar with. I know that you played in an era that a lot of players might recognize, like obviously Jason Klaczynski, but in addition to that, are there any other like big name players from back then that you kind of maybe wish got the recognition that they deserve for how good they were?
Oh yeah, there's so many that the we didn't have the stream, obviously. We didn't have the online representation that we do, but I feel like a lot of people know at least of Curran Hill or Blaine Hill and their accomplishments, but their brother was so good. He was very impressive, and he won multiple regionals playing this wacky four corners deck over the years. They're also the Craig family. I've mentioned Orion. He won a national championship in the seniors division, but his brother Eric was one of my idols growing up. Just fantastic at the game, really strong player. Steven Silvestro, 2009 world champion, is from Florida. He kind of brought me in like a younger brother and gave me an opportunity to play a lot with him. We didn't exactly share lists, but we just valued each other as competitors, and we would get really strong testing from each other. Um, there was so many great players in Florida alone, but I got to play a lot with the Pukas, the Jasons, and their testing groups, which I guess that was Lafante back then. If anybody knows of the Lafante stories, those guys are insane. But they would join the Georgia Marathon, which is where everybody got a good feel for how the season was going to go. That was the stomping grounds. If you wanted to get good at Pokemon, you played the Georgia Marathon all the way through.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm familiar. I mean, I only got into the game around like Black and White era, but I'm familiar with Jimmy Ballard's Chicago Marathon, playing like 10 cities in like 2 weeks over winter break. So
Yep, yep.
I can
That's
relate a bit. It's pretty intense.
yeah. That's all modeled after the Georgia Marathon. It is easily one of my favorite times playing Pokemon. It is a grind. It is exhausting, but it is so fun. And you'd feel like it'd get boring playing 10 straight days of the same format over and over again. But there's so many mind games that go into what changes do you make? How do you adjust your deck? What is everyone going to do based off the information that they saw? Oh, we heard the Chicago boys are flying in on Tuesday. What does that do for this meta? All those kind of things. So we were computing like crazy with no actual internet on how this all works, and we got a lot of people uh ended up giving us some free trophies throughout all that because we were doing a lot of work.
Yeah, because you mentioned you really got into metagaming. I'm guessing this is kind of one of the places where you really learned that skill.
Yeah, it was very helpful. I had 2 years where all these tournaments were city championships back then. So uh, we you were capped out at four was the amount that they'd allow you to win and still earn points for. You could still play more and get the trophies if you wanted, but if a lot of people, if you did get to four, which was impossible, you would then start conceding to your friends or whatever. You would just go in there as an assassin, we called it. So I just beat people and then try to give a win to my brother. And I was able to win four twice in 2 different years, and just had really strong metagame forecasts. Was the first player to win four in both of those years, and then had a little time to goof off and go play assassin.
Hmm. Do you feel like that's a skill that is very transferable to today's meta, or do you feel like that's more relevant for kind of back in the day when everything was just much smaller and it was much easier to predict that a certain player's one tricked certain decks?
I, we just have so many good players right now that you can't really predict for them. You would hope that in a world that is rewarding of skill that you could predict what Azul's group plays and predict what the Hedricks are playing and all those great players, and then get rewarded for identifying that, oh, Snorlax block beats all those, for example, or whatever it may be. And then you could just run into a meta that destroys you because the noobs are still playing XYZ that just blows you up. So it was a lot easier back then with a smaller field, even though it was condensed skill wise. It almost felt like an advantage because you knew you weren't going to run into the wacky stuff. You'd always run into really consistent decks, really strong play, but it was predictable play. And that was what I mainly learned from aging up from a senior to a master was, although they were a lot worse in the senior division, I appreciated the consistency that my opponents were able to bring in masters, and I feel like I played better against that than playing against the wacky stuff. Which, if we jump into my worlds runs, the wacky stuff is always what gets me. Wacky stuff at nationals and worlds always ruined my day.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about that 2006 Worlds run because you ended up top 16. I have the results here. You played LBS, and
Yep.
I have just a couple quick LBS like questions for people who might not be familiar. For one, I think LBS is one of the decks that today, if you look at it, is just unbelievably expensive to build,
Yeah.
and maybe this is just kind of a weird like perspective question, but back in the day, what was it like financially building some of these decks? Because looking back, an NERSPK deck now is just not going to give you a accurate idea of what it was like to put these together back when they were standard.
Yeah. So I have it built now. It's still here at home, The issue is I can never sell it because back then we were able to Sharpie our cards. They didn't care if you drew on them or let your friends sign them or do weird stuff as long as it's only on the art of the card. So I have a lot of cards that I just can never sell because I drew all over them or had friends sign them or say goofy things.
Really?
It was fun to let your friends ruin your deck and then you got to win with their Steven's advice or their
Mm.
POW hand extension was the one that got you there. And then you'd all get to reminisce or talk about that. Or you have a really great match with a player and then you let them sign one of your cards and you bring it through the for the next day. That was also something that we'd end up doing a lot too. So I have a lot of really funny cards that are sitting at home right now. So they're not terribly expensive for me now, even though that deck goes for what, 2 grand at this point.
Something like that. I mean, there's
Yeah.
the Lugia EX and then just the star Pokemon in it
The
are just
Latias Star in there as well. I mean,
yeah.
those ones are not written on. I respected the good cards. My Blastoise looks great, but that Onyx, it can't see the light of day, and we did horrible things to it.
Oh goodness.
So, but but as far as building them back then, it was. I mean, it wasn't very hard because we had pre-releases that paid. We had pre-releases that really respected good play. You'd go to these events, you'd pay your $15 or whatever it was. You get your 6 packs, you'd get 2 additional packs for pre-regging, and then if you won the event, you'd get like 45 packs. And we'd win every time. Like it was very easy for us. And then they'd have multiple of these. So for $15, I basically have half the set, and then from there it's just about trading or attending league and trying to build on that. Maybe the hardest cards were to find were the EXs and the stars, but even then we had a lot of resources to trade for those, and I think maximum you were paying like $45 for a star back then. The value of the cards really increased as the years passed, but they weren't very high in the day.
Yeah, that's I think that's something that collectors today can't really visualize a star costing anything under $100.
Do you know how many Trico Star, Umbreon, Shinies from the pop sets, all those cards that I just gave away or sold for pennies on the dollar back then that I'm crying about as I see their prices now post COVID? It's it's heartbreaking to think how much money I could add if I had a little bit of foresight.
Yeah, and then especially like during COVID, a lot of like old ETBs and packs, like all those generations, evolutions boxes that everyone thought were garbage, and then they're worth whatever they're worth now, right?
Oh yeah, my brother bought a house off of Legendary Treasures or whatever it was. Yeah, I think it was Legendary Treasures. Like he was able to sell that along with a couple other like Chilling Reign, a few other random sets, and I think he made like 40 grand, like something stupid.
Wow. So LBS, the deck you played to top 32 at 2006 Worlds, what was kind of the strength of that deck? You already mentioned it was kind of seen as the best deck in the format, and then how did that Worlds run go?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the more powerful decks out there. It had the ability to compete with some of the bare bones decks like Ryegs was the really big issue that started to come around after the Nationals run that we ran into, and it was just a lot of meddling 70 and 80 hit point Pokemon, the Raichu and the Executor, that you couldn't really figure out an answer to. But we went with playing the War Turtle, which was able to do 40 Smash turn, which was weakness into the Executor, so you could protect it, smash into it, get a knockout, and run away. So I really focused on different lines of play. I would attack with the Blastoise very aggressively too. It dealt 80 damage for 4 waters and had an opportunity to remove some energies too. Maybe if you run into the Raichu with multiple special metals on it that would protect it from being knocked out that turn, you could remove those and have an opportunity there. So it was really rewarding as far as like a play style kind of deck where you could pick how you wanted the match to go, fast or slow. You could add in Pow Hand Extension if you wanted to give up the early lead, which was a card that I really was a big fan of, and I always made sure I had one in the deck. And I remember vividly having a really strong run at that Worlds and then I ran into some Frenchman that I'd never heard of because, of course, back then, if they were international, there's no way you knew about them unless it was Yamato on the other side of the table. Uh, and he was playing Evolutions with Arcanine. And I'm like,
Ah.
what is this? I've seen Arcanine before. I'm gonna destroy this. I've got a Blastoise. Like I'm one shot and everything. This is gonna be the freest game of my life. And this guy was able to use the Espeon, de-evolve me, and my rare candies weren't doing anything. He had Jolteon in there dealing extra damage, and he was setting up ridiculous knockouts with the Arcanine, and it didn't seem to make sense. The deck didn't work. I would say that the deck was arguably bad, but it got me that day, and I was game one. He just steamrolls me. I didn't get a strong setup. Game two, I come up with arguably one of my favorite plays I've ever done, where I cannot knock out the active Pokemon. I just can't come up with enough basic water energies for the Blastoise to attack or whatever it was. And I find my Steelix, and I'm like, Steelix into the fire. This is horrible, but whatever. And I snipe into the Espeon for 100, and sure enough, the thing has 110. But I knew this. And he knocks me out, and then I go and I play Rocket's admin, get him his hand down low, and I find my Holland's Magnemite, and I play the Magnemite down, throw a cast form on it, and it deals 10 damage to any Pokemon in play.
Oh, okay.
And I sniped that Espeon off the board, and I end up winning the game. And I had set it up because it was a legitimate debate back then of if you wanted to play the Magnemite or the Voltorb, because they both sucked. They were awful. And if you're attacking with them, you've probably already lost the game. But I thought about it, and I was like, there might be a world where I need to deal 110 over 2 turns, and I found it. And then game three, I open up with 7 basic Pokemon in my hand, and I concede like 4 or 5 turns in.
Hmm.
I was like, all right, not meant to win this, but I had fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting looking at the deck. It feels like I don't know if there's really quite like a modern equivalent. It feels like a little bit of Charizard and Chen Pao all working at once. There's just a lot of moving parts, but like the ceiling of the deck is just so high.
Yeah, it's the ability to. I'd say Chien-Pao feels like a good comparison because sniping back then, it was an entire deck if you wanted to do that. But this one had the play around where Steelix could be worked into the mix as a 1/1. Some people would play it as a 2/2 and really be focused on that. But this deck was all about hitting really hard. That Lugia would come out of nowhere, blast a Pokemon that they spent their entire life trying to get set up, and then from there you could steamroll them. Resources were able to be shuffled right back into the deck really quickly. You had the Holland's Mentor searching out energy cards because Holland's cast form was able to be found. It was just it felt like it was operating on another level compared to every other deck.
So your next big finish, at least based on just like the the research I was able to do, was a top 16 at Worlds 2008. Was 2007 a big year for you, or does it just happen to be when I couldn't find results on, or was it a bit of a slower year for you before you pop back off at 2008?
I arguably 2007 was my best year. I That was the year that I was did the state championship run playing the Delta Flygon. I was the number one player in the world in ELO that year for good four months or so. I think starting in like November, and then it just continued on after the states run. I was able to hold on to it almost until nationals. I stayed within like the top 2 or 3, and then at nationals, I had a decision to make because I was gonna earn the ELO uh, World's invite to Hawaii that year, but I didn't have any money, so my parents weren't gonna pay for me to fly. So the only way that I was gonna get the invite paid for and actually be able to attend it was to make top 8 at nationals. So I took a risk there, played a deck that I felt comfortable with, but it wasn't a good meta call. Uh, I lost to my ex-girlfriend round 1, and she felt bad for me and conceded,
Oh
and then I dropped
goodness.
from the tournament. So
Dang,
I
not
I think
ideal.
yeah, it was like and it was like so many players back then for us, of course. I was like, oh man, like this is super, like 1,000 players or whatever what was it. Maybe it was even like 500. It was, but like we were like, oh, that's crazy. And then to see ex-girlfriend on the other side of the table, and then for her to destroy me, I'm like, oh man, this is not my day. So I was not able to get it done, and I wasn't able to attend that world. So I actually have never been to a Hawaii Worlds because of the flight issue of it. I just never had the foresight to be like, I should save some money and buy a flight. But it was always, if Pokemon will pay for me to be there, then I'll be there.
Hmm. So then 2008, you came back with very, very strong finishes. I know you said 2007 was kind of your most consistent finishes, but 2008 just top 16 at Worlds. That's quite the accomplishment. Can you tell us a bit about how you got to that point?
Yeah, that was, I mean, that was a really fun year too. I think I did well at states as well. I think every year from like '07 on, I at least won one state championship. I ended up with 7 of them. So that was always the first stomping ground. You'd get through your cities and then you'd play at the states, and that's when you got a good feel for how your season was going to go. Did well there, won one of those. I think I was playing this really goofy deck that we called G Unit. Uh, it was just a combination of all these G Pokemon, kind of like Crobat G, Honchkrow G, all those. And it was able to compete with the Palkias and the Dialgas somehow, some way. It was really goofy, but we put a lot of time into it, and that won me one state. And then can't remember the regionals of that year. I'm assuming I didn't do great, but uh, going into nationals, I think I had another decently strong finish, maybe a top 64 or so, and I had gotten my world's invite from all that, and I played at Worlds playing Gardevoir, and I might be mixing up my years now thinking about
Yeah, I'm
G
looking at the
Pokemon stuff.
results. 2008 Nationals was like all Gardevoir Gallade. I don't think like the G
Yeah,
stuff was a thing
I
yet.
think I'm moving into not '09 or 10. Regardless, there was one state win somewhere in there, and then we moved into the Guardy Gallade was like the deck for, I think, for nationals and for worlds. That was the year where Gino, Lombardi, and a couple others were just crushing it with that deck. Jason obviously was really strong with it too. I think we had all decided that that was going to be like the best deck of the tournament, and had dedicated a lot of resources to it. And my big plan going into there was I really like Psychic Lock, which sure everybody does. 60 damage, lock out the abilities on your opponent's side was the reason why the deck was strong. But also you had Gallade, which you could come in, flip over some prize cards, and get big knockouts that you couldn't afford to wait on as Gardevoir. And I wasn't ready to give up my abilities that turn. So I played Cessation Crystal, which was unheard of back then. And but I sprinkled that in, and the turn that I would take off of Psychic Lock, I'd come up with the Gallade, Cessation Crystal, and take my big knockout. And they'd still not have abilities, and then I'd rotate back to my Gardevoir. And I think I ended up fourth place, fourth seed, going into cut at Worlds. I think it was like 7-1. Just a really, really strong showing. That was probably the best run I'd ever had at the World Championships. And I get Chris Fulop in top 32, who is second place, 2004 World Championship, playing Blaziken against Yamato. So huge respect for this guy. And he's playing Empoleon with the Bronzong, which, I mean, that was one of the most 50-50 matchups in all of Pokemon. It was very fun to play. It could go either way. It was exhausting, but I was drawing hotter than the sun, and I ran through them pretty quickly. We had a good time with it, but I thought there was nothing that was going to stop me that day. And then I get to top 16, and I face Jimmy O'Brien, who's also playing the Empoleon Bronzong, and one of the big pieces of that matchup was how the Team Galactic's wager went. which for players unfamiliar, it made you play rock paper scissors, and the winner would get 6 cards, loser would get 3, and I was so shook when this guy would not actually play rock paper scissors with me. Jimmy would take a rock paper or scissors card and shuffle them around in his hands and put one on the ground. But he'd take a quick look, make sure it was the one he wanted, and then he'd pick it. And the mind games he was playing with me, when I tell you he won like 11 of 13 of these rock, paper, scissors, I was playing with half a deck the whole time against him, and he's just setting up, doing crazy things. I'm like, how? Every single time where I'm about to make a comeback, this man just resets me to 3, and we're right back in hell doing nothing.
Was that just like the best disruption available at that time?
Yeah, like it was there was no admin, I don't believe, so that was the best way to reset an opponent was you beat them in rock paper scissors and you hope for the best, and it worked. It was really good as Gardevoir because you could obviously try to stick them with the low hand and then psychic lock them. So I played a bunch of them myself. But I mean, if you if you just keep losing rock paper scissors, you're gonna lose anyways.
Yeah, it's like I think that season is like the perfect middle of like no admin and no judge. So it's just you play what you can get, right?
Yep, and I mean, I was getting good at the meta game of rock paper scissors itself. It was a skill that was practiced in Japan, and we started playing a bit of it ourselves. And we'd be reading like how tight he holds his hand means he's probably going to throw rock, or if you start to be aggressive with your throws, then the tendency starts to be that your opponent goes for this instead. Like we were deep into actual rock paper scissors gameplay, and then he just started flipping cards on me, and I had nothing.
That's pretty insane. I mean, that's pretty cool. Like I like the idea of just like I'll shuffle my 3 card deck and leave it to fate.
Yeah, he just crushed me with it. I'd never seen anything like it, and I've never seen anything like it again from till that day.
I don't know if we've seen rock paper scissors since that day either.
Well, we saw Dan, right?
We did see Dan. We saw Dan on stream.
Yeah,
That's
that was
true.
when I tell you, man, just seeing that just hurts me. Like it's so many bad memories of me just putting out scissors to my opponent who just flips over a card with a big grin on his face. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me, dude.
So then you said like things didn't really go your way. You just kept getting disrupted basically against Jimmy in that top 16 match.
Yeah, and he ran me out of resources. Just wasn't able to find the right hands. I'm not sure if I was even able to bring it to a 3-game series, but I was fighting, but it wasn't gonna happen, and it was pretty unfortunate because I think we had Glaceon on our side of the bracket, so I felt fairly confident that I was gonna beat that guy, and then be able to go into the top 4, and it was probably just gonna be mirror matches from there, which myself having the cessation turn could be a big deal, stuff like that. So I mean, his history could have been a big friend of mine, but it chose not to.
Hmm. If only he shuffled his cards differently, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if he actually played rock paper scissors like a gentleman, well, I might be a world champion.
Is that what you tell yourself, right?
Yeah. Every night before I go to bed.
Do you see him anytime now? I know Jimmy has played a little bit since kind of in the modern era.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
bring that up to him?
I've seen him a lot. He knows he got the best of me, and I've mentioned it on broadcast a few times too. Whenever we see him, that like his name just like I have nightmare flashes anytime I see him on a bracket. Like big respect to him. He's a really good player too. But like it's just that one it burned into my memory. It was
Mm.
it was a bad time.
Looking back at that time period, that the Ruby and Sapphire EX era up until the Diamond and Pearl era, is there a particular format or season that really stands out to you? I know nowadays a lot of players really like to play RSPK, just the whole Ruby and Sapphire block as a whole. Is that a format you still look back to, or is there more specific years that you're very fond of?
I never really got into the RSPK because although it might be a really fun format, like to test yourself competitively, for me, it's always been about the nostalgia and being able to relive some of the glory days. So I like revisiting '04 through '08. So I have '04, '05, '06, '07, '08, all those built. My the most decks I have is '05 and '06. I think I have like 10 of each. And that's one of my favorite formats to revisit is that time period. I feel like the iteration of the Holland engine was one of my favorite parts of the gameplay. Back then, everyone was playing like a 2-2-1 line of transceiver, mentor, and scientist. And I mean, I didn't see it anywhere else, so I've given myself the credit. But I was one of the first players to really popularize playing four transceivers. That was just not a common thing for the players back then. Everyone thought 2-2-1 was enough. It kind of mimicked what you were looking for with like a Lynette's net search or whatever it may be. And I'm like, no, this is like you guys don't understand. This is the best card in the whole format right now. Holland's Transceiver does work. And I extended the line, played a 4-2-1-1, potentially the other one if you wanted to add in the farmer, but I knew the adventurer was really big too. And the consistency that allowed and the different decks you were able to play, that was probably why '07 is like one of or '06 is one of my favorite formats to play.
Hmm. And we talked about it before the broadcast. I'm kind of looking into building some '06 stuff. I played a little bit at NAIC. It was I'm looking into Arcanine, which you mentioned you had a kind of a weird time against in
Yeah, you keep that away from
2006.
me. I'm done with Arcanine.
All right, well, I'm not putting
I
any EVs in my list, so
thank you.
yeah. Um,
What was one of the more popular? I think Houndoom probably got to see a little with it.
yeah, I think
It
Arcanine Houndoom is the. I'm just going off of Jay Horning's list. He's had
yeah.
a lot of resources online for that time period, and seems to be he's had pretty good success as well. So
Oh yeah. Yeah, he has a lot of results. We did joke about that every state championship he ever won was against a cow, like in the middle of a field because he lived in like the middle of nowhere. But then he'd show up to Worlds and he'd get top four every time. We're like, all right, we actually have to respect this guy. He's pretty good.
for sure. So again, I'm just going off the results that I'm able to find. So if there's anything I'm missing, please let me know. I do see kind of a pause of like major results under your name after 2008 up until around 2011. How did like the rest of the Diamond and Pearl block look like for you, and then the start of the Black and White season?
Yeah, it wasn't. It certainly wasn't a bad time. I was still finding results. I think just we didn't keep very good track of it back then, especially for players that weren't winning the events. So I think in that time, I had multiple, maybe even three third place regional finishes, uh, playing through 2010 to 2011. Still was able to win on the state side. I think I played Firestarter Blaziken with like Delphox and some things in whatever season that was. Maybe that was like 2011 or so.
Delphox was that's like 2015,
Oh, stop! Am I
14,
really that far
15.
off? How far along was that?
Because I think X and Y was like 2014, like when it came
Oh,
out.
was that? Okay,
Yeah.
what was Blaziken Firestarter? What was he? What did I pair that with?
Um,
God.
like the reprinted one.
Yeah, the reprinted one. Was that because that one won me a state, but I don't remember if I paired that with Delphox.
I'm trying to figure it out. So the Blaziken Firestarter reprint came out in Dragon Majesty in 2018. So
All right, we're that
we
can't be
might be
right.
getting some stuff mixed up.
All right, let's go. Yeah, that's what happens when you play for 20 years is everything just becomes one amorphous blob of play. So not that then.
Possibly not.
So RS we're still talking about we got a little bit of the G stuff. So that's probably where G Unit came in then around like 2009,
Yeah, that
2010.
seems right.
Okay, so G Unit did work for me. I played a Dialga hybrid deck with some like Toxicroak and other G Pokemon too that I got third place with lost to a Machamp that I believe ended up winning the tournament that day. So there were still a bunch of like little results, but still enough to compete at the world stage. But Worlds was bad, really bad. I think after '08, I went like a collective like 1-14 at the World Championships over the next few
Hmm.
years. Like it just I lost it from there. That was my shot.
We're gonna jump back to like 2011, but I did a little deeper dive. When you're thinking of the Blaziken, are you thinking of the Embor that attaches fire energy? Because that was a deck with
I
Delphox.
I got okay, I played that one with Delphox and was got second place to Daniel Altavilla at the Georgia Regional Championship. Uh, I'm thinking of a state championship where I played. Oh, it was just an old bad Firestarter Blaziken. I think it was. Gosh, what was the name of the set? I think it was like PK or something. I don't even know. Something dumb. But like the deck wasn't good. but but it but
Gotcha.
but it still won.
Yeah,
And I was like,
I'll
oh,
have to
this
do
is
some digging here.
yeah. I'm like, this is how I got my seventh winner over this stupid thing. It was just not a good deck.
Hmm. Yeah, I do wish results were kept a little bit better. Just selfishly, Illinois State's was my first ever top cut, so there's no proof of it. So,
Yeah.
but I know it happened.
Yep. Yeah. It was all on everyone to post your own results on PokeGym if you wanted it to be maintained, and we would all just keep our results in our tagline underneath whenever we posted. You'd be like, "Oh man, that guy got third at whatever. He must be good." And
Hmm.
everyone would just keep updating that, and that's how they knew if they should respect your opinion or not.
So then you kind of start popping off again with a lot of big results, like 2011 to 2013 time period. You just looking through here, you have some pretty good regionals finishes with Yen Mega Magnezone. You're playing Gengar, Vileplume, Weavile. I'm just going off PTCG archive, trying to piece together some memories here. You
Yeah,
had
no,
some
but
finishes with
it's starting to fire. I
yeah.
remember a bit of those tournaments.
Yeah, you played you had Electric Decks, TDK. Obviously, TDK is one we can maybe talk about because that's where you and your brother both had incredibly good finishes at nationals.
Yep. Yeah, the we can jump into that Young Mega Magnezone first. It was
Yeah, go for it.
that one was actually streamed by Top Cut. They have hidden deep dive YouTube footage of me playing the top 16 game against Jordan Parrish. And for whatever reason I was mad playing against him. I don't remember why, but like I, I think we may have had a little beef, or like maybe I just didn't like the what was happening there, but I was feisty in that game, and I was very happy to win. Uh, I end up getting to top four, and I play against Steven Varesco, and he is playing a deck that I just did not respect. He's playing the Zekrom Shaman, trying to move the Pachirisu ZPSD
Mm-hmm.
with the Tornadus as well, and he just played a really janky list, and I didn't think that it was supposed to work. He played super scoop ups in there too, and he was just doing the stupidest things over and over again, and he got me down to like the very last turn of game three, got a lucky coin flip and won, and ends up going to the finals. And I'm like, dude, that should have been mine. Like another one that just really bit me and made me sad. Uh, from there, we played Philly regionals a little later, and that's where I played the Vileplume Gengar. I went undefeated that day. I was 9-0 to make it into top 16 or whatever it was. And I mean, fainting spells are going my way. I'm setting up this Vileplume so easily. And I had a really cool tech inclusion. I played Weavile Claw Snag, which would allow you to discard a card from your opponent's hand. You get to look and then discard, which was just gross. And you already play so many ways to pick up your Pokemon. You have like Seeker and things like that. So I think I can't. There was some way to pick up Pokemon, and So I'd pick up the Weavile and get to reuse Claw Snag a few times. And the big issue back then was you're playing against power sprays. So they would power spray you, turn off your Gengar level X, and then you'd run into issues where you're not de-evolving them and disrupting them. And I would go in, I'd Claw Snag, and I'm like, well, you can either power spray this, or I'm gonna discard your power spray. Good luck. And I dominated every SP deck that I played against, and I run into a Pokedad in top four playing Steelix with healing. And the only way I win the matchup is if I flip heads on Feigning Spell. I just need to knock out the Steelix cleanly because I can never attack through it. He keeps his hand size low. I'm not able to Poltergeist through it. I can't accumulate damage on this thing because he's just healing over and over. And I was not able to get enough heads flips.
Dang. So kind of the trend of losing it to kind of weird, weird, funky decks continues, right?
Yeah, every time. It's just if I just played against the meta, I'd be fine. I was looking forward to playing against Luke Reed on the other side in the finals. I thought I had a pretty good matchup against him, and for whatever reason, I was his kryptonite, even though he was one of the better players in the Virginia area. I always had him, and I'm like, cool, let me just get through this dad, and I'll meet you. And nope, that was not gonna happen.
So then the really big finish after that, that really I think stands out to me and to a lot of players, is that 2013 Nationals, with TDK, where your brother got second place and then you finished in the was it top 32 as well?
Yep.
Yep. Um, I guess we haven't really brought it up a lot, but how was it like playing with your brother, testing with him, and both of you competing at a lot of the same events?
Yeah, it was a blessing to have him and have him as competitive as I am as well. He had moments where it kind of fluttered and flickered, and he wasn't feeling it. But then I would start to do well at tournaments, and it would reignite in him, and he'd get that competitive drive. And then I kind of had similar spots going off to college. I was like, do I really want to keep up with this? I'm back in Maryland. I gotta like relearn my area and stuff. And he was like, brother, I'm gonna keep playing down here. I'll pick up where you left off. And he he won a regional every year since I moved to college for like 4 or 5 years. It was something ridiculous. And he picked it up and never stopped and was easily one of the top 5 players every single year for like that half a decade.
Hmm.
And I just kept following his results. We played regionals at the same time but in different places because back then we'd have like 2 or 3 regionals in the same weekend. So I'm hearing about him in the finals playing Terrakion Electric against another great player down south, and I'm up there playing Vilegar, trying to win my own regional. And it was just like, obviously the internet sucks, so we're just like texting each other, trying to figure out what's happening, and like as everything's going on, it's just a really cool bond that we were able to share as we connected through there. Not even at the same tournaments, and then you get us in the same room together, playing at master in the Masters division, and that nationals felt special. We put so much work into those decks. I believe that's the year that we also had Jason Klaczynski at our house for a week. He randomly messaged me saying, "Hey, I'm like moving from Florida to Chicago. I'm gonna move back home to Chicago, but I want to take a detour. Can I like come to your house in South Carolina?" I'm like, "What? The world champion wants to come hang out?" I'm like, sure. Let me ask my mom." And my mom's like, "Yeah, okay." And sure enough, he lived with us for like, I don't know, 7 to 10 days. And we were like streaming, doing Sable stream back then, and we just streamed for a few hours. But we made him play every single game on stream. We streamed him over and over again. Got like so much great testing, and in that time, that's when we found Life Dew in the TDK list, and that like melted people's brains to think, oh, you can flip the prize trade in the mirror matchup or against like Darkrai Absol decks. It was it was gross what you were able to do with that Life Dew. And Ryan, I mean, he to his credit, he had a really good line, really strong play, and he was able to burn through his side of the bracket. I got stuck playing against James Hart in top 32, really strong player in Tennessee, but he knows I should have won. I know I was gonna win. I had at least 20 turns where I did not do anything and I was still about to win the game. Like I was one turn away.
Hmm.
But I was just drawing that poorly. And he was not able to capitalize on it and put me away. And I was still that close. But it was just demoralizing to know that I was that close and could have been right there with Ryan. And it just wasn't going to happen for me.
Yeah, I mean, for and also just a quick side note for those who don't know, we're talking about when we're talking about TDK, it's like this plasma deck that's honestly pretty similar to kind of the future box we have today. But you said you were playing Life Dew, which is an A spec that made the Pokemon holding it give one less prize. What led to that discovery?
Well, there was a big debate back then of computer search or dowsing machine as the best A spec in the deck because obviously the consistency of computer search very valued. But dowsing machine, just finding that one extra whatever it was in the middle of a game was really strong too. And we were finding that our setup was fine. We weren't running into issues as far as the supporter count. We felt really strong with the numbers that we had as far as basic Pokemon too. And we were finding consistent openers. That wasn't the problem. The problem was in the middle of the game, there comes a turn where you need to promote a Kyurem or a tanked Thundurus or whatever it may be, and you can't afford to give up that prize card, but you do need to still present a threat. And we found the Life Dew. That was a card that was being used a little bit in like Sableye Garbodor back then, and we kind of drew from that, and we're like, well, we're not going to use it 8 times, but if we get it to once, that's going to be enough. And people weren't playing a way to counter the tool back then, so we just took advantage of an open issue that we saw in the meta, and it really paid off.
Yeah, and Ryan ended up getting to that finals against Edwin Curris. Could you I think I was at that nationals, but I don't think I watched the finals. Could you tell us about how that went for him?
Oh man, you missed an amazing one.
Is that like the Duskull game? I
I
remember
I
something about a Duskull.
I started that chant. Yep. I hadn't. I'm not that guy. I'm not the big cheerer. I'm not trying to like get a lot of popularity, but I love my brother. And I was all about hyping up this crowd, getting everyone excited because we knew going into this matchup, it is like 90-10. It sucks. It is so hard to win because the Acelgor locks us out. We don't have ways to switch around.
Yeah,
It's
it's
just
item lock and it's
paralysis.
paralysis, and they move the damage around your board. So
You can't win if they set up. It's too hard. So we knew we were dead. And I was all about just trying to keep everyone's hopes up. Yeah, I know he's already won a bunch of money and like this is going to be like really big for him, but let's not count him out yet. And we talked to Puka right before the game. I think we talked to him that night before, and he was like, in my best Puka impression, "You got to bring the noise." And we were like, "What are you talking about, brother?" And he's like, "Thunderous." I'm like, oh, "Wait, hold up, what?" So we're like, "Oh crap, he actually wants us to do the 4 energy attack on Thunderous and get in there and start bodying people." And sure enough, we did get destroyed game one, but Ryan goes aggro Thunderous in game two, and he's bringing the noise, and he takes like 4 prize cards with this thing, and ends up winning game two. And we're like, holy crap, he could actually do this. We might actually win. Uh, Only thing that we need right now is for Curris to open up Duskull Pass, and I started chanting it with my boys, and it took over the whole arena. Everyone's screaming Duskull Pass, and you can like hear it in the background. Like everyone's going nuts with it, and it just became a huge meme in itself. And we almost got what we wanted. Obviously, we didn't get the Duskull, but it was a bad opener. Curtis actually like misplays too, and plays himself into a dead hand. And then the very next turn, he top decks the Juniper and is able to play and set up and win. But I mean, he was doing everything he could to make that matchup not 90-10. And Ryan almost was able to do it, but it was a huge moment for us. And there's like this really great shot of him playing in the tournament and me in the front seat with all of our friends and family from Pokemon. And it's, I mean, I'll never forget that moment for sure.
That's really amazing. Now, since that really incredible finish that you and your brother both had, you've continued to have some pretty nice success. You were able to get top four at regionals in 2017, a top eight in 2018. Um, but you did eventually start kind of transitioning towards doing commentary. Is there a reason you started looking for that avenue of participating in the Pokemon TCG?
It it was never really an expectation because I didn't know that it was even an opportunity that I'd have. But I was just streaming Pokemon because I loved it. Like that was what we wanted to do every day. We would sit down. I had an Xbox like webcam, like horrible specs on that thing. And we'd set it up, hook it up to like our ceiling fan and try to play Pokemon. Like we were doing the dumbest things just to bring Pokemon content out and have fun and interact with the community. And we would do that every summer for like 3 years. We called it the Sable Stream. And it was just me and my brother blasting horrible pop music and having a blast and playing decks and doing all sorts of wacky stuff. And that got the attention of Puka somehow, some way. He got his spot with the Pokemon Company. He was one of the broadcasters back then, and obviously, like we had some really great battles throughout the time. He was aware of me and stuff, and obviously I knew of him, and we had some rapport. And he saw Ryan at a tournament, and he's like, "Hey, like, does your brother still play? Is he still interested?" Because I think this was like 2015, and I was slowing down. I was playing maybe half the events, not all of them. And he's like, "Yeah, he's still playing every once in a while, but I think he's like just getting tired of the grind," which was fair. And he's like, "Well, if he's looking to commentate, let me know." And Ryan's like, "I'm not even gonna ask him. I know his answer's yes, but but sure, if you want to do that, like we can do it." And that was my window in. Uh, I got an opportunity to cast like that next fall, and never looked back from there. But still, streaming back then as opposed to now, we streamed 3 regionals, nationals, and worlds. We'd get 5 events every year, so it wasn't a full time gig. We just do whatever we could. We had a blast with it, of course, but it was an afterthought compared to just still wanting to go out there and play more Pokemon. So I got to play a few regionals a year, and I always still thought of myself as a player first. And so I gave it as a best a run as I could, and I was able to get a couple good finishes each year.
Hmm. Yeah, and as I mentioned, you've continued to play. You've continued to have very strong finishes, while also doing commentary in between all of that. How did you continue to hone that skill? Is there kind of a commentator who you looked up to in the Pokemon scene, or just in general in other sports or competitions that kind of their style you really wanted to emulate and what you bring to the game?
Yeah, once Pokemon showed that they were serious about, like, they want this to be a full on production. They want us to be the next esports big thing, and they started putting their money where their mouth is. That's when I was like, "Oh, well, like this is, if we're going to look at this as a job, I'm going to look at it as a job. This isn't just me talking about Pokemon cards anymore. This is, we are entertaining, but I'm also going to inform as well." So I was trying to find what the best mix of that is for myself, and I feel like I took a lot from, of all places, Super Smash Bros. Commentary. I really love Scar and Toph. They do a really great job of having witty banter, but also being informative, but being so entertaining the entire time. And you can feel how much love they have for their game because they were grinding. They were playing in the basement tournaments, traveling X amount of hours in the car, doing East Coast West Coast battles. Like they were all about the grassroots grind, and then they were rewarded for their efforts. And were streaming all of the major events every other weekend and having a blast with they basically were brothers throughout that whole thing, just having a really good time with their friends. And I wanted to be able to find that, but also uh, give the game the credit that it deserves too, because we're not a shoutcast kind of broadcast. We have moments like that where I want to bring the entertainment that I feel, like that excitement level. So certainly like there's moments for it, but also you have to remember like we're a card game. Like there's a lot of skill intensive things going on. There is going to be downtime, so you have to find that roller coaster of building the story up. You can't just be riding down for 3 minutes yelling "we." You gotta build it up. Maybe have a couple loop de loops in there too. And I feel like Tony Romo for NFL broadcast does a really strong job of building a story, sharing some knowledge from what it's like to be an ex player, and also bringing a little bit of that like predictive skill of I expect this because of XYZ, and then more often than not he's going to nail that prediction. And I really appreciated that, and I like to incorporate that into my broadcast too.
Hmm. How does it feel, kind of seeing the whole production of a regional now from both perspectives, especially in the same season? You're on the caster desk 1 week, and then a month later you're playing. How do you has it been interesting, kind of seeing the similarities and differences between everything going on?
It's I mean behind the stage I don't think the typical player has like any idea of the true level of production that is going on back there. It is a huge show, like 50 plus people putting on the best show that they can for this, trying to show off all of the excitement that is Pokemon and everything that's going on in a tournament too. I just have a lot of respect for everyone who's a part of that process, and everyone who takes their job seriously on the commentator desk too. Like if you're gonna put in the effort and you love the game as much as I do, then more power to you. Get in there and cast as many games as you can. And I feel like it's one of those spots with playing the game where you have a lot of respect for like the competitors inside and out, like being able to actually play against them as opposed to just watching them too. So it's been cool for me to get both sides of that, where I sit down, I'm in their head as a player, like watching Tord Reklev and trying to get in his brain of what every single move he's going to make is, and then trying to predict that for the broadcast. But then also getting to play against him day two of Peoria and get a feel for what that actually is. Like they're just two different beasts, but it's so fun to be on both sides.
That's definitely really cool. Um, and as we maybe start kind of winding down the conversation, I maybe want to ask you a little bit to like reflect on some of your experiences, and if there's maybe any new players listening who are still looking to improve at the game, or even players who've been playing for a while who might be less familiar with some of the older decks and the older events that you've brought up. Is there any skills that you feel have translated over time that have allowed you to stay so successful? And is there any suggestions you'd give to players who are looking to improve?
Yeah, it's all about what the format looks like. So obviously we're playing best of 3 50 minutes right now. So you have to adjust for that. Back then, when I was finding most of my success, we were playing a lot of best of 30 minutes. You'd get one really strong game in, so you could settle down, take your time, and find your spots. And it was kind of just like a boxer waiting for your opponent to make a mistake, and then you could capitalize on those moments. I feel like we have very fringe moments of that in this current format, but most of the time it's about playing really well, playing consistently, and playing quick is the play that gets rewarded, or at least doesn't have a witch hunt after the tournament. And I, I have a lot of respect for the players who just sit down and try to get as many games in as they can, but also play it at a high level. And you'll notice that if I'm on stream, I'm conceding game two almost every time. I don't care. Like I'm here to play Pokemon. I'm not going to sit here and play a really ugly game two and then have 5 minutes of game three. If game two doesn't look good for me, I'm out of there. I want to play a really nice game three with 20 something minutes on the clock, and I want to 2-0 you in my fashion to get my points and move on. And I've had a lot of opportunities to do that. On like the Charlotte broadcast in 2017, they put me on a few like three times that broadcast, and I just love conceding game two. I'm not here for it. get me out of there. Let me go first, and let me show you what I'm capable of. And I was able to do that at NAIC last year as well.
Hmm. Would you say then that that's like kind of confidence in your own play is a big factor? Because what you said just now is, I think, a skill that I've personally definitely had to work on. Like, I'd have games where I win game one, I'm losing game two, and I'm thinking, well, what if I don't win game three? What if I get donked game three? Let's just see how it goes. You seem to kind of have that confidence from all your years of playing, where you're like, I know I'm good at the game. I know how how things can go. I'd rather play a full game than kind of dilly dally and just wait till game two finishes up.
Yeah, the clock awareness is really important because there's two ways to look at that. It's either you're going to abuse the clock or you're gonna use the clock, and I use the clock. I'm very aware of how much time I have, but I'm also not gonna sit there and run my turns out and make this an unfun experience for myself and for my opponent. That was a big difference of like the players way back when and some of the players now is we had spirit of the game, which was basically our only rule back then. It was just a phrase that meant just go out there and have fun and don't be a jerk. And we lived by that. That was if your opponent flips over a card, they just put it back on the top of their deck. They didn't mean any ill will. They just wanted to do they were just playing too fast, or they made a mistake. All right, let's try to rewind it and let's just keep going because like we're all here to have fun. And I I think that just like was ingrained in me. Like I wanted to go in there and I wanted to beat you with Pokemon play. I didn't want to beat you because of silly time rules or because of other things. I'm just gonna make sure that I get the most out of this 50 minutes that I can. So it's definitely important to be aware of the clock and understand that your opponent isn't just the guy on the other side of the table from you or girl. It's gonna be that clock, and you want to make sure that you can get as much gameplay as you can out of it.
For sure, and especially nowadays, that's something I'm guessing you'd probably suggest players work on actively to make sure they prepare. Because playing best of ones at a cup or just playing online will just not have you ready for a 50-minute best of three.
Shuffling takes so long. It sucks. Mulligans, every mulligan's like a minute and a half. They're like it adds up. And then you play on stream. You've got the stream jitters. You're placing your prize cards slowly. You're thinking about how your board is set up. Like you're not focused on actual Pokemon. You're focused on how pretty the product is, and it's just not. You don't have as much time. You got to play fast, and you have to be aware of what actually is important in those spots. And I feel like a lot of players lose sight of that.
Mm. And kind of the last question I want to ask as we start wrapping up is, how have you managed to balance all these different things that you've done for the community, whether it's playing at events at a top level, doing your own streaming, now commentary, having a family? How have you managed to strike that balance? And is there anything you'd recommend for other players to learn from?
I mean, I'm very blessed. I I had a little bit of a life plan, but it didn't go the way that I intended to. Uh, I'd say it's very important to just put yourself out there and give yourself opportunities to succeed. And if you fail, it's completely fine. I failed out of college. I went back to college and I passed college. I went and did a master's degree. I do behavior analyst work with kids with autism as my 9 to 5 job, and I absolutely love that. It's so rewarding to work with kids and get them into school settings. I also have the commentary gig too, and as soon as that was bestowed upon me, that was like the biggest honor, and I wanted to make sure that I gave that opportunity everything that I could. So I'm testing for it. I was doing coaching with kids, but also that coaching was a lot of the time for me too, just to keep me fresh and give me a really good sight on what the metagame looks like, what has changed since then. So it was just really great opportunities to like help other people, but also help myself and get to continue to play this game that I love. So a lot of it's just about balance, just finding time to enjoy your hobbies. But right now, the two biggest things that I have going on in my life, other than raising a family, is I get to work with kids and have fun, and then I get to talk about my favorite card game from 20 years ago. Like it's I've made a career out of just things that I really like doing, and I mean it's a phrase they always say is that do something you love and you never work a day in your life. And I feel very blessed to be able to do both those things.
Mm, that's fantastic, dude. I'm just so happy for you. It seems like a good
Thank you,
culmination of
thank you.
a lot of different things you've worked through. Good ending to that. Not ending. There's still a lot more to go, obviously,
Yeah,
but good place
no,
to be at.
I mean, the story can definitely go on and on. I was able to bring my brother in backstage, so he's actually part of production now. So I get to work with him at all these events, which is really fun to be a part of that and get to pick his six-time regional winning brain as we're breaking down plays and stuff. I've got my kids too. My daughters are 3 and 1 right now, and I can't wait for them to have an opportunity to embrace the game and give it a shot too. They love all the characters, and they really liked being at the events as well. My daughter loved NAIC. She got to attend the Ohio one previously. So there's just so much potential in the Pokemon community for everyone to have a good time, and I just want to share that with everyone I can.
I love that. Um, as we wrap up, is there any events you're planning on being at anytime soon? I know it's really just Worlds coming up at this point. Officially, any shout outs and where can people get in touch with you?
I'll be attending Worlds. I'm really excited to see what they have planned in Hawaii. It's my first time going to Hawaii, so I'm assuming that they're gonna really put a big show on for that. And I'll be I'm always on Twitter. For whatever reason, people keep following me. I feel like I don't post very much, but I appreciate everyone who does stay tuned and keeps up with that. It's at K Sabelhaus, Sabelhaus. Somehow I'm doing better than Jeremy and all of his great memes. So keep that going, guys. And I'm always really open to meeting and talking to new people, old players, whatever it may be. I just love hearing everyone's story and also getting to hear about what brought you into Pokemon too. So it's if you see me out there, even if I'm wearing my suit, wearing slacks, whatever it may be, just come find me, come chat. It's always fun to hear from you guys.
All right. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for speaking with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a great time.
For sure. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to Kyle for being so generous with his time. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you're interested in hearing more conversations like this one, please consider giving the podcast a follow, review, or rating wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at memcappodcast, or if you want to see me post about my TCG experiences, you can follow me on Twitter at RZGladys. Hope you have a great day, and thank you for listening.